Perfect. Okay. All right. So today what we're going to talk about, the good thing, I was looking through the slides last night, and most of the stuff that you're going to see today, and maybe all of it, but the large majority of the stuff we've talked about, or I've talked about, in kind of generalities, and these are the types of how projects are put together. So it'll kind of be a review, but I really like this lecture in the sense because now you can kind of see how parties work together. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a little bit about a little bit more about the AIA contracts and what they're used for, and then contracting methods, and when I say project delivery methods, which I realize there's a typo there, deliver methods, I will correct that. That the project delivery methods is how do we, when you enter into a contract between an owner and a contractor, this is less to do the project delivery methods with the architect and much more to do on the construction side. There are different models, both in how the payment structure is put together. That's one area and avenue we'll talk about today. And then the second area is it a traditional design bid build? Is it fast track? Is it design build? There are different ways of how the parties look to get from beginning to end. For hundreds of years, projects were all very static and very straightforward of how they did. For the last 30 to 40 years, the owners and contractors, and even architects getting involved, have come up with some really creative solutions on how to build projects faster, more efficiently, and ultimately, if it's faster, more efficient, you're going to have a lower price. So it's to the benefit of everybody. Contractor can get it done faster, they get more work themselves, owner pays less money, it's more efficient. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And these are important for when you get out, because when you sit down with an owner, at some point in time, hopefully all of you guys, if you're practicing, will at some point in your careers have the benefit of advising an owner and saying, well, for this type of project you want to use this delivery method, and for this type of project you want to use this delivery method. And the lecture today will explain why one is used over the other. So, without further ado, so we all know we've gone through, we spent a great deal of time on the B101 and the A201. Those are the two most important and most widely used documents in U.S. construction. And as I said, even if they're not on an AIA form, I find so many contracts that I'm working on that are not form contracts, but actually have language almost word for word pulled from the AIA documents. In fact, right now, actually, I'm negotiating or drafting an agreement that the client has used their standardized form for years. We helped draft it many years ago because they have a very kind of special niche in the market. But they want to modify their project delivery method. They've had a very traditional method that they've used for all their projects, and they want to modify it for this one. They're kind of trying to branch out. And in fact, for what I'm doing for them, I'm actually pulling language from the AIA forms that uses this model, because I know when we send this to their contractors, they're going to be familiar with the language. So they won't be like, oh my God, you guys are changing it completely. They're going to see stuff that sounds familiar, looks familiar. And that's one of the benefits of the AIA documents is, since so many people have seen them and they've been used in so many different formats, there's less hassle with negotiating and getting the front end done, and you can get into the design and the construction of the project. So, okay. So, I've mentioned this before, but I wanted you guys to see this. So, in the AIA documents, they call them their series. So, there's the A series, B series, C series, and G series are the most important ones. I don't even know if there's a D or E or F, because I've never used any of those. There may be. I'll have to go on the AIA website and take a look to see. But for your purposes, these are the only ones that are really going to be important that you guys will see by and large throughout your career. I mean, I've been doing this for 30 years, and I don't think I've ever seen anything other than these three series of documents. So under the A series, Those are all contract documents that relate to the owner and the contractor. And there's a whole bunch of them. And they're all different, these project delivery methods and everything else that we're going to talk about. There's a form for basically every single one. So as I have here as the example, the A201, and that's the general conditions. And in fact, the A201 integrates with almost all of these A series. So when you think about them, when you think owner-contractor, in your head think A series. So anytime you see the preface A and then a number beyond that, you're going to say, oh, this is between an owner and a contractor. And that's the simple thing. I've always found it somewhat perplexing that they are the AIA documents, which is the American Institute of Architects, and that the A series, not because it starts with an A, but that the first series in the letter of the alphabet isn't the owner-architect agreement. Those are the B series. It's just a weird thing that I think about, like, well, if you guys are doing these documents, why wouldn't you guys be the first, the A series, and the contractor be the B series? Doesn't matter. For purposes of all agreements between owner and design professionals, those are the B series. And the B101 is, again, the most common agreement there. Now, the difference between the A series and the B series is that there's going to be A100s, 101, 102, 103, 104, and then there's going to be the A200s. And those, so when you have, for most of your projects with the owner-contractor, you're going to be using two documents, two instruments. The 100 series, for understanding, has the business terms. It's going to be the description of the project. It's going to have the price. It's going to have the duration or the schedule. And it's going to have details of how payments are made. Pricing, individual hourly rates, whatever. So think of 100, 101, 102, 103, whatever. The 100 series are the business terms. The 200 series is a complementary document that goes with the 100 series, and that has what's called the general conditions. Those are the terms that relate to the actual construction. And we just went through the A201, so you know how it says, okay, here's the owner's obligations with respect to the project, here's the contractor's obligations, the subcontractors. And all the times that I say, playing by the rules of monopoly, the majority of those monopoly rules are going to be found in the 200 series, for the A series, the A200 series. For the B series, it's only going to be one document. There's no 200 series. It's just the B100s. There's the 101, 102, 103, 104, and 105. That's where you find in the B series. So you're never going to find two sets. And that will contain, in the B series, both the business terms and the rules of monopoly. It's all together in one document. It says the architect's going to do, here's the schedule for the architect, here's the payment, and here's what the scope of work for the architect is, and that's schematic design, design development, those types of things, which you guys remember from our lecture, the B101. So, structurally, traditionally the A series are two documents, and the B series are one document. Now, there are a couple of places in the A series where it's a single document. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but by and large, think about two documents. The C series is a series that connects the dots between whether it's the contractor and its subs or the architect and its consultants. So there's going to be some C-series documents that are going to be contractor-subcontractor. And there's going to be other C-series documents that are architect and electrical engineer, or they're design consultants. So C covers both design and construction, whereas A is construction, B is design, C covers both. The owner is not going to be a signator to any of the C-series documents. So in your role, advising your clients as the architect, you're going to have your own C-series with your own consultants downstream, your electrical engineer, your mechanical engineer. but you're not going to be preparing or help prepare a C-Series document if you guys go out to bid for the contractor. They're going to have their own C-Series. Now, you may review them and tell the owner, I like the terms in that, or some other stuff, but you're not going to be dealing with the construction side of the C-Series or advising the owner on those, really. Those are kind of the second-tier levels. And then the last series are what's called the G-Series. And those are your payment documentation, the actual forms that when the contractor submits an invoice to you, it's called an application for payment, it's going to be on a document called the G701 or G702, and those forms will identify a bunch of information, like it's going to say the name of the project, and it's going to have a whole bunch of lines. Imagine a big spreadsheet. A whole bunch of lines, and in each line it's going to say in the first column, concrete. And in the second column it's going to say Sarah's Concrete Company, Inc. In the third column it's going to say value of contract $1 million. The fourth column is going to say amount of work paid to date, and then amount of work remaining, and amount for this payment. So it's going to have this running total. So when you get this application for payment or invoice, as the owner or the architect reviewing it, you're going to go through this whole list. Here are all the trades working on the project. Here are all the price points, and here's how much we paid. So you can track and follow it. So the G-Series will have, that's one part of the G-Series, is the application for payment. I've mentioned change orders in the past. There's a change order form. I mentioned RFIs, request for information. They have a form for that. So these are all these kind of attachments. So the parties have standardized documents for communicating. Other couple types of forms, if you remember, in the both the A101, the A201 and the B101, if you remember, there was that sustainability document that we talked about. So the sustainability document is a G-Series document. Another one is if there's a bond on the project. That's the G310 and 312. So there's all these kind of forms. They're not agreements, but they're forms. And that's what you're going to see in the G-Series. About the G-Series documents is, again, because of the pervasiveness of the AIA forms being used for so many decades, many projects that have no AIA contracts, they don't use the A series or the B series, they have their own standardized form, and it may not have any of the common language. You know, as I talk often, I'll see common, consistent language when I'm looking at a non-AIA form, but you can see the language in there. People have cut and pasted the important provisions. Even if you have a contract that has none of that, you will very frequently see this payment application G-Series form. In fact, you'll see a contract that has nothing to do with AIA, and it'll say, in the payment part, contractor shall submit its application for payment using the G702, 703. So that document you guys are going to see over and over and over and over again. I can send out a link to what you can. I don't have one in the paperwork today, but the slides today. But I can send out a link so you guys can take a look at it and see what it is. But it's there, and you'll see that forever. So those are the four big series that you're going to use throughout all of your career, and kind of how the AIA suite of documents work. Any questions on that? Excellent. Okay. So I told you, as I said, that the A series has the 100 and 200 series. These are the most common forms of the 100 series. The 101, 102, 103, and then the 141. There's another one that's called the A133, and I don't have it on the list. It's similar to some of these, so sometimes people will use one of these forms as opposed to the A133. I'll talk about that in a second, but these are the ones you guys are going to see, again, most common throughout your career. So the 101, and the difference between them is, because this is the business end, the difference between these documents is by and large on this payment methodology as opposed to the work and how the work is delivered. So in the 101, it's based on a lump sum agreement. I will build that house for you for $1 million. And when we have it under a lump sum, the owner gets an invoice once a month, and that invoice is based on the work the percentage of work that's complete. So think about it this way: you have that G702 document that I talked about that it's a spreadsheet, has all the line items that says, concrete, rough carpentry, and finished carpentry, electrical, mechanical, has all the listings of the types of trades. And it's going to say concrete for this project, $100,000. Under a lump sum contract, when you submit that first invoice, when the contractor gives you the first invoice, they will have been billed dollars from the concrete contractor, probably based on the actual cost. But you're not sure. But what you're going to see on your invoice, you the owner and you the architect helping the owner, is you're going to see that it says, value of contract $100,000, amount of work completed to date 30%, so I'm owed $30,000. So when you're doing lump sum work, you're being billed on a percent complete. And you as the architect that's helping the owner out are going to go out to the project site, you're going to know how much the concrete foundations are going to be or what have you, and you're going to have them look and say, yeah, they did about 30% of the work. So it appears that the percentage that they're requesting is proper. Sometimes you'll see, especially early on in the project, an invoice that'll have under line item, it'll say structural steel, and it'll say 80%, and you walk out on the project site and there's absolutely no structural steel done whatsoever. That may be an issue where the contractor had to do a long lead bid or long lead purchase because it takes so long for them to fabricate the steel and everything else. So the work may not be completed, but they may have to charge you for the pricing. But again, it'll be based on a percent complete of the overall contract price. And so one of the things as an architect that you're going to need to learn over the course of your career, and you'll work with senior people at your firm and everything else, is how to walk a project site and analyze the percent complete of the work and use those guesstimates, your trained eye guesstimate, against what the contractor is invoicing. And there will be a discussion once that payment application is submitted between yourself, the owner, and the contractor to make sure that that the numbers are relatively fair and accurate as to the amount of work performed. Last point on this, and why that analysis is important. Contractors, and it's not a nefarious reason, although there are good and bad contractors in every place, but contractors will often tend to accelerate their percentages early on in the project because they're spending lots of money buying materials and buying equipment and getting everything. So in the beginning of a project, you can imagine the contractor has a fairly substantial outlay of cash versus the actual work that's being done. And you got to rent a trailer, and you got to rent porta potties, and you got to rent your crane, and you got to get your people mobilized and everything else. And this is all before you dug a hole. And you have this excavation line item, and you haven't done any work, but you got all this equipment and everything else. So what's going to happen is you, as the architect, need to gauge and help the owner understand why the work may not be as far along as the percents are, and you may need to keep the contractor in check so you're billing too fast too quickly. Because what you don't want to do is have too much of the money front-loaded on a lump sum project, and then we get to the back end of the project and there's not enough money to finish the project. So that's kind of a word of the wise. The A101, the lump sum contract, is probably the most commonly used form of all the AIA contracts. It's the easiest, it's the least amount of paperwork, and because so many projects are not the multi-million dollars, so many projects are, houses. Just think about all the houses that are being built out there on a daily basis. The millions and millions of houses get built over a year or a couple of years. It's so much easier to do that lump sum. Or I may have mentioned, I can't remember, a few years back we had a kitchen renovation. It was a $60,000 addition. That was a lump sum. So it's so much easier to do it that way. So that's the most common you'll see. The second, the A102. Any questions on the 101? Okay. The A102 and the A103, those are both based on what's called a cost of the work plus a fee. So they are the same concept of how the billing is done. The difference between the 102 and the 103 is the 102 has what's called a guaranteed maximum price. And what you want to think about for yourself, what's that mean? It's a cap. So we're going to talk a little bit about the 103, and then we'll go back to the 102, because the 103 covers both sides. So if you're doing a contract, if you're a contractor and you're building it on the cost of the work plus a fee, let's go back to that same application for payment. You submit your first invoice, there's a listing that says concrete, $100,000. And instead of putting in that we're 30% complete, therefore you owe me $30,000, it says $32,561.18, and attached as backup to that document is the actual invoice from the concrete subcontractor and anything related to concrete. So each and every trade will be listed in this schedule of values, this G702 document, and each and every contract amount, and it's the actual cost that they have, that they spent, the subcontractor spent, and invoiced the contractor. So it's not based on this guesstimate, it's the actual dollars. So that's the cost of the work. And as you can see, cost of the work here is in caps, and if you remember from both the B101 and the A201, that too, cost of the work was a defined term. So you're going to have these consistent terms. It's going to show up in your G702 and 703 pay app, but it's going to say, every dime I spend as the contractor, owner, you're going to see it. It's transparent. And that's what the cost plus, and then the plus a fee, the contractor's going to say, well, I have to make money. I've got this bill for $30,516.78 or whatever I said. I have this bill. I'm going to charge you. I'm going to pass that through transparently to you. But I, as a contractor, I have to make money myself. That's one of the things I do. So I'm going to have a markup. I'm going to charge you my fee. And the fee, again, is a capitalized term because it's defined. And in that 103 or 102, because it's the business terms, that fee will be defined. So, and most of the time it's going to be a percent. So let's say it's $30,000 and your fee is 10%. The invoice will say $33,000 because it's $30,000 for the cost of the work. Your 10% markup fee of $3,000. Total owed under this invoice is $33,000. So that's how a cost plus a fee, cost of the work plus a fee contract works. And that's the basis of the A103. That's the discussion. The answer to the discussion of which payment method you use, that discussion you have with the owner, is hinged on the question you just asked. So the short answer is it the same, is it a means to the same ends? The answer is no. The reason being is, when you go into an A101 as a lump sum, the end of that, the contractor says to the owner, I will build this house for you for $1 million. And the owner knows that. And if the owner makes no changes, and if there's no hassles that come up, and they don't find stuff in the soil, and everything goes out with a hitch, like my kitchen was perfect, cost me $60,000. He bid $60,000, some change. I knew before I signed the contract that's what it was going to cost me, and when I was done, I knew what that was going to cost me. So the end is known at the beginning. Under the A103, this cost of the work plus a fee, you have no idea how much it's going to cost at the back end. Now, you'll get an estimate. They're going to give you an estimate when they do the bid, But along the way, if the contractor says, I thought that the electrical was going to be $6,000, Mr. Hanahan, for yours, but I couldn't get the right electrician, I had to bring somebody in, it was $8,000. If I signed an A103, I have to pay $8,000. I don't have any checks or balances on the 103. So it's a cost of the work, whatever it costs. So it's a means in the sense of you're going to get, this is how we process the payments, but the end result could be very different. Now, the interesting thing is, there are reasons why, then you'd be saying to yourself, well, why would you ever want to then get into this open-ended cost of the work? And the reason why is because some owners feel that they are sophisticated enough, and it's true, or the project is small enough and it's manageable enough, that they feel that if they work with the contractor and there's the transparency of seeing every single invoice, that they feel that they could get it either cheaper or they know they're getting exactly what they pay for. With the lump sum, the contractor could have came to me, and I did 4 or 5 bids, so I kind of knew where the ballpark was. But just to give you an example, I had 5 bids for my kitchen addition. The highest was $122,000, double what I paid. The lowest was like 48. There was like a 48, there was the 60, there was a 68 and like a 74, and then there was one that jumped up to $122,000. Same drawings, same project. Well, yes, I knew going in, but the reality is when you have this lump sum, I would never have seen, if I just gone to the first contractor and he said it's $122,000, I never would have seen how much profit and how much overages the first guy was going to be making on me. So you can't see behind the curtains in the A101, but you know what the price is going to be. In the A103, you get to see everything behind the curtains, but you don't know what the end is. So that's the big difference between the two. And that's the reason why I talked about the 103 first, because the 102 is a combination of the two. What happened and let's go back, I'll give you a quick little 30-second history lesson. For years, for decades, I'm talking back, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, 103 was the way work was done. It's time and materials. That's just the way. I'll show up, I'll dig a fence for you, I'll charge you per hourly wages. That's what everybody did for centuries. And then, going back even still a couple centuries, finally some people said, well, I can do this for one price. And so those things started to come in. So the 102 and the 103 are pricing models that have been around for centuries. I don't know how long the 102 has been in place, but somebody came up with this idea that said, maybe what I can do is I can give the owner the comfort of being able to be transparent and see everything, but I can guarantee them that it'll never go over this price, and that's the cap, that guaranteed maximum price. So, what happens in that is, lump sum contract, I'll build that house for you for $1 million. The 103 cost plus is, I'll build that house for whatever it costs. And the 102 says, I'll build that house for whatever it costs, but I promise I won't go over $1.1 million. And so you say to yourself, well, why would I go with that? It's $100,000 more than lump sum. And the answer is because this person building it under the 102 could come in at $880,000. You could save money potentially in the 102 because you don't really know the end game, but you know you're never going to go over the 1.1 million. So there's business decisions that the owner will make as to which of these 3 models do they want to use. Lump sum, fee without a cap, or the GMP, the cap. In my world, as the projects start to get larger, and I would never do anything over even $1 million with a 103. But as you get into things like, if a project that's somewhere between 5 and 50 to 100 million, there may be benefits of doing the 101 because there's a lot less paperwork, there's a lot less information that you need to do. But as you start to get higher, there's benefits for having this cap because if you want to think about it, like I have a project right now, one of the factories I'm working on, it's a $350 million project. And if it goes 10% over budget, that's another $35 million. So when you start looking at percentages over budget, you want to have those caps built in. So often for these larger ones, I do what's called the A102 model. It's a cost of the work, so you can track it with a guaranteed maximum price. Okay? All right, two real quick things, or three things, two on the screen and the other one. So the 104 is, it actually uses any of the three payment methods. What the 104 does is it's kind of this one-stop shop. Remember I said in the A series, you're going to have the 100 series, A100 and the A200 series. You're going to have the business terms, and you're going to have the rules to monopoly. The 104 is a unique document. It combines the both. It takes the best of the rules of monopoly from the A201, and it takes all the business terms and sticks them together into one document. So if you ever are going to do a project under the A104, you're only going to need one form, and that's the A104. Anyway, the one thing about the A104 is that it has, in the payment section, it has basically kind of like a check the box. We can do this, if you want to do it under lump sum, use these paragraphs. If you want to do it under cost plus, use these paragraphs. And if you want to do it under a GMP, use these paragraphs. So there's a section, and you just strike out the other two sections. And so you can have any one of the three models above in the A104. And the projects that you're going to use the A104 are smaller projects. You're going to use those for maybe an office build-out. Maybe I had a teeny tiny little contract for, I didn't even use an AIA for my kitchen addition, but I could have used an A104 for that. So the A104, you want to think about it is probably projects of a couple million or less, short term, 6 months or less. You don't have to have a lot of the detail and everything else. But that's the kind of the one-stop shop. The A141 and then the other one I talked about, the A133, which is not on the screen. Those are two forms where the payment structure could use any one of the three, but the model is, the 141 is design build. So in that instance, and we'll talk about design build a little bit more later today, is where the contractor and the architect are the same company. So that would be the A141, design build. It's all done at one time. Or the A133 is what's called a construction manager, and that's where the contractor joins the project before the drawings are completed and does like pre-construction work, so the parties start working earlier. So, and we'll talk about that again a little bit later today as well. So those are two other forms, the A141 and the A133. Different chart, this is the B series. The reason why I don't have really anything like the payment stuff and everything else is in the B series for the owner-architect agreements. The concepts are the same in each one. As you remember, it's a one-stop shop, so each one of the B series is going to have the parties, the payment terms, and the scope of work. So everything's going to be all kind of combined. Most of the time, and if you remember in the B101, in Article 11, it was you could get paid on a lump sum, you could be paid hourly, or there was that chart that had the percentage of my work would be done under schematic design, design development, construction documents, contract administration, and completion. So those are all the same in each one of the B documents. The 101, the 103, 104, 105. I don't think there's a 102 that I recall. So really the difference in the B series is what are the size of projects that you use them on. So when you're looking with your owner, and your owner comes to you and says, I want to retain you for designing my house, and what contract do you think we should use? Well, you say to them, well, what's the size, and what are we going to do? And you think to yourself, okay, maybe we'll do the B101 because I know that the most. And if you can see the box on here on the screen, it covers almost the entire kind of gambit from small projects to big projects. That's why it's used the most. But maybe, like for my kitchen addition, I could have done the B105. It's real simple. It's it's not many pages. It doesn't have all of the steps, schematic, design development, all the detail and everything about you got to give me a cost estimate at the end of each phase and blah, blah, blah. It's pretty simple. So that's the B105. You use that for your small little, $15, $20, $100,000 or less type things. You could use it for even up to $1 million, but it's just the tiny little room addition type things. The B104 is a document that you actually would use in conjunction. It's built specifically to be used with the A104. So if you ever know, as you're talking to the owner, that we want to have this one-stop shopping document here instead of a 100 and a 200, if you think that it's best to use the A104, and you're going to be thinking about that as the architect, then you're going to want to use the B104. One little trivia tidbit here. For years, this was called the B104, and this was called the A107. They worked hand in glove. I want to say for 30 years, there was the 107 and the 104, and finally somebody at the AIA said, why don't we call them both the 104s? We're using them together, let's use the same number. So they finally clued on that. So the B104 is going to be used most often when you're using the A104. It doesn't have to be, but mostly. And that's going to be for medium-sized projects. So it's kind of the second most used. And then finally, the B103 are for extra large and more complex documents and projects. The only reason, the primary difference between the 101 and the 103 is that the architect has more responsibility on price and schedule analysis. So they're going to say at the end of each phase in the B101, if you remember, there was a cost estimate. At the end of the B103, that process is more detailed and in depth, so that the owner has a better way to track the anticipated cost of its projects before construction starts, and so the architect has more obligations to give a better breakdown, more detailed information, and it also has more obligations related to schedule management. That's why for a larger project, because time and money are the most important as projects get bigger, that's why you might use the 103 on larger projects. Probably to be accurate, the box for the 101 probably could go all the way up to the top. I've used 101s on projects in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So it doesn't mean that after I get to the tip-top scale of large projects, you have to use the 103. Sometimes you may not need the architect to do the cost analysis because you've hired a third party to assist in that. But for purposes of your understanding, for purposes of the exam, just kind of think about this chart. B101 covers the most, and the others kind of fit into these ranges. Any questions on the B series? Okay. So we're going to talk, and I've done a little bit of this already when we were talking about the A101, 102, but now we're going to talk a little bit about how a few more pieces of information on these pricing variations of how they work. So fixed price contracts, that's your lump sum, that's going to be the 101. A couple more tidbits or points about that. The contractor bears all risk of cost overruns. If I said as the contractor, I'm going to build your house for $1 million, if it costs me $800,000, good on me. If it costs me $1.2 million, bad on me, I still have to pay the additional $200,000. The owner pays me $1 million no matter what. So the risk of overruns are the contractors, but the risk or the benefit of windfall profits is also on the contractor. So there's the pluses and the minus. And as a result of those two elements, and this is again another discussion point you want to have with your owner, lump sum contracts have a tendency to lead to more adversarial relationships between owners and contractors. And I say to you, I'll build that house for you for $1 million. And you sign on the dotted line and we're good. And then you start working along and maybe there's some change in the industry. Maybe there's a glut. Well, I'll give you a perfect example. Like a number of years ago, there was a run on precious metals, copper, silver, because of all the building that was going on in China. They were constructing so much that the price of those metals for use in buildings, computers, running wires, copper for plumbing, all those types of things, started going through the roof. Any contractor that had entered into a lump sum contract may have found themselves behind the eight ball, because when they went out to buy copper wire for running electrical work in a building, because the supply is short, the price that they anticipated on paying when they entered into the agreement went way up. So they thought to themselves, when I get to electrical, I got to dig the hole, and I got to build the structure, and I got to dry it in, and then run the conduit. And finally, 6 months into the project, I'll finally start pulling my copper wire. Well, 6 months down the road, the costs were really expensive. And contractor goes back to the owner and says, hey, you have to pay for this. And the owner says, no, I don't, because you signed a lump sum contract. Well, no, my design hasn't changed. So the contractor started getting hits on that. So what ends up happening is that the contractor will then come back and say, well, this is a change in the economy. This is a change that's out of my control, so I'm going to submit a change order. And then the owner says, well, I still have to pay for it because we haven't discussed that. I actually have that going on right now in a very specific project, because they're saying supply issues due to COVID are making the project more expensive. And I'm like, it's not my problem. You knew when they signed this contract in January. Like, we were 10 and a half months into COVID when you signed this contract. Don't tell me that you didn't know that these could happen. So it creates an adversarial relationship because the contractor is bearing that risk. Or on the flip side, if the owner feels that the contractor is going cheap, oh, well, you were supposed to use this type of material. Now, this type of wood, you're using pine instead of walnut. You're cheaping me out so you can make a profit. Then the owner gets wary of the contractor. The contractor's like, no, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. I'm building your house. Stay out of my face. So because because of where the risk falls, and because you don't get to see behind the curtain of what the money is really being spent, that can create tensions between owner and contractor. So that's the downside of fixed price. Obviously, we talked about the upside. Going in, it's $1 million, and that's all you're going to spend. On the cost plus contract, as I said, it's time and materials. There's that fee I talked about. Cost of the work plus a fee. So we're going to see transparency in the cost, and then we're going to mark it up. Most of the time, the fee will be a percentage. Sometimes it could be a fixed sum, meaning every month I'm going to charge you a set fee. So I have another project right now that no matter how much the contractor spends in that month, the fee is guaranteed to be X thousands of dollars. The project is 26 months long. Every single month the fee is in the exact same amount. The contractor could have spent $30,000 that month or $1.2 million that month. There's no markup. There's no connection between what they spend in the first of the month from month to month. It's guaranteed every month the fee will be the same amount. Or you can have some formula. The issue, as I talked about earlier with cost plus, is it's hard to control those costs unless you have that cap. And then we talked about the cap. And then the last couple of things on this cap concept or whatever to help the parties work together. Because as you think about this, I understand your point about a potential adversarial relationship in lump sum, because somebody's going to be taking the risk if it goes too much. And so the contractor could be in that same position with a guaranteed maximum price. There's that cap. If it goes over the cap, the contractor has to pay. So what you sometimes do, this fourth bullet, is you put what's called a shared savings clause in the contract, and you say, okay, I think you're a good contractor. You say you can do this house for me for $1.1 million. I get that. Somebody else says they can guarantee to do it for $1 million. Why would I go with you? And the contractor comes back and says, I can come in under $1 million. but I want to protect myself just in case there's this cost issue like copper, or who knows. So I want to just protect myself, and I think it's fair for everybody. The owner says, yeah, but what incentive do I have that you're ever going to come in under the $1,000,001? I mean, if it says you can spend up to $1,000,001, why aren't you going to spend it? And the contractor says, well, let's do what's called a shared savings. For every dollar that I come in under the $1.1 million, we split it. You give me 20 cents, you keep 80. So let's say at the end of the project, it comes in at $1 million. Well, the owner pays them $1,200,000 because there's that 20%. It's free money of $200,000 to the contractor because he only spent $1 million. But the owner had a little bit, but maybe not the best deal there. But let's say it comes in at $900,000. Well, there's a $200,000 savings there. So now you have a 20% split. So now you have, I said 200,000. It's 20,000. Sorry, not 200,000, 20,000. But if you come in 200,000 under budget, the shared savings is you give them 40. So now it costs 940,000. Even though we said it might be 1.1 million, if it comes in at 900, you pay them 940. You're still under the million that the lump sum person did. So you have this split for every dollar under the price. You share that savings. And that makes the teams work collaboratively. The contractor says, I'm going to build this as best I can, as quickly as I can, as efficiently as I can, because I can make some free money. And the owner says, I know you're not cheaping out on your materials because I get to see everything behind the curtains. And I may have to pay you this little bonus at the end, but that's the peace of mind I have that I don't get with a lump sum. We'll work as a team with a shared savings under this guaranteed maximum price as opposed to potentially adversaries under a lump sum. One other type of pricing that comes in, so we've been talking about this cost of the work, like you get an actual invoice and it's like, here's how much it costs me to do my labor and here's the actual cost of my materials and that's your cost of the work. There's one other model or method that can be used on certain projects and almost always is used on others. It's called unit pricing. For that, imagine I'm a roadway contractor. I'm building roads. Instead of coming out and pricing how much it's going to cost for a tenth of a mile, you say, I will charge you X dollars per cubic yard of concrete I pour, and Y dollars of linear feet of rebar I insert. So for every foot, it has a price. For every cubic yard, it has a price, and that's called a unit price. Unit prices you're going to see in things like I said, concrete, rebar, linear feet of piping or conduit. Sometimes you're going to see it in, like if somebody comes and does tuck pointing of a building, each and every brick masonry unit, every piece of stone that I have to tuck point, I get a certain number of pennies per piece of brick that I tuck point. So those are all quantity takeoffs, and that's what's called unit prices. And sometimes you'll see a project where most of the work will be done on a time and materials. You can see the exact price of how much the material and the labor cost, but there'll be a component where it'll be unit price. So we'll have a kind of a hybrid. We have projects. Some of the invoicing will be based on units, and some will be based on the actual cost. Okay. So those are some of how the pricing points come together. Now, when you're working with your owner, the owner comes to you and says, hey, I want to make sure I get the best price, and I want to make sure I'm using the best model and everything else. So you kind of you walk through the 101, 102, 103 concepts, and you kind of come to this decision. And I do this with clients all the time. In fact, for my Haribo building, I actually made a presentation to their board between the different project delivery methods. I went through not these exact slides, but similar slides, describing to them why model A versus B versus C is more beneficial for the project they did. And from that, then they made a decision based on my recommendation, and then I prepared a contract for them that we would be using for the project. Now we have to bring in the contractor, so we go out for bid. And so the next role that you guys are going to use, be as an architect, is you're going to be working with them on competitive bidding. We have the contract that we want to use. Now we want to go out and see if we can get the best contractor. So in competitive bidding, there are different types and models that they use. So you're going to always have competitive bids for public projects. That's by law. But they're often used for private projects. Like I said, the Harrible project is private. Or I'm working on another one for one of my clients that does stuff in the energy business, and we're going to go out for proposals, and it's going to be based on a competitive bid. Now, there are the competitive bid, and then there's what's called the negotiated price proposal, which we'll talk about in a second. With competitive, you get all the bids in, you open them up, and there's a winner. And it's based on what's called the lowest responsible and responsive bidder. So the lowest responsible bidder is obviously the best price. But they have to be responsive, meaning in that request for proposals, there's going to be a list of requirements that the contractor must satisfy. And as long as they satisfy all those requirements, they have enough financial stability, they've done enough projects in this area, whatever all those requirements are, that's going to be the lowest responsive bid. That's what's done in public projects by and large, and that's going to be the winner. So you hear this public bid, you open it up, the low bid wins. That's what the lowest responsible. The second one here, the best value method, or sometimes called negotiated proposal, that doesn't always have to be the lowest responsible. It doesn't have to be the best price. It's in fact what it says, the best value. You use this for design build, and in those instances what happens is when the RFPs come in, the responses from your 10 or 12 contractors or whatever it is that are bidding, you'll look at all the prices, and that will count as a factor in determining whether they are, you'll rank those cheapest to the highest in pricing. But then there's going to be other factors. If it's a design build, what do their designs look like? If they're, what experience do they have in this industry? So the best value method is more subjective. The lowest responsible and responsive is almost entirely objective. But both of those are going to be used as bidding methodologies, that competitive bids that you're going to assist you'll probably assist an owner on with. The one exception I have here is a sole source. For many years I represented a client. They started in the oil industry, and when you had an oil well and the oil was coming up, they had to tap it to make sure that it didn't keep, you think about the movies, the oil spraying out of the derrick or whatever. You have to tap that so you can cap it. But then you have to connect to that tap pipes that can get the oil flowing, and maybe sometimes you have to do maintenance on those pipes, so you have to have a bypass valve and some other stuff. So they started in that industry, but developed this technology that also worked in the waterway systems. And this technology that they have, they were literally the only company in the Western Hemisphere. There was a company in Australia, a company in Japan, that could do what they did and had their own patents. But literally in the entire Western Hemisphere, north and south, they were the only company that could do this. So I did projects with them where they didn't have to be a competitive bid. They were the only one in the world, or this half of the world, so they were always sole source. So that when you're working with your owner, you don't have to worry about this competitive price. If they're allowed to bid and they come in and they're lowest responsive and responsible, the answer is yes, you would have to contract with them. So what you do in and I represent a number of public agencies, and so I've had similar discussions with them. There are a couple of things you could do. Some projects you are allowed as the public agency to have, while it's lowest responsive and responsible, you are allowed to have a bid by invite only. So it's not necessarily a published where anybody can bid. But that's not all of them. And in fact, there are various laws that are out on the books, because if you could always do bid by invite only, what ended up happening, and this has happened in lots of times in Chicago over the years, not as much recently, obviously, but it used to be not an uncommon thing, and certainly the first Mayor Daley's regime, and I don't know if it happened more recently in Ritchie's, but if you could always make it as a by invite only, you'd only invite your friends. So you got to get away from that. You got to let everybody bid if they want to. So for that, then what you need to do is you need to draft provisions in both the RFP that goes out that asks for their track record, and that they would have then to have to have satisfied, whatever these requirements or qualifications. And you may not like them because they're hard to deal with, but if they come in at the best price and the project gets done, well, then that's the end goal of the public bidding statutes. But if their projects come in at over budget and you look at their history, maybe then they won't have qualified under one of the responsive qualifications. The third thing that you do then is, if you know that contractor A has been, we've worked with them before, but they've been a complete pain, is then you got to make sure that the contract itself addresses the lessons learned. There's going to be things that you learned from the last project and the project before that were a problem. And so you built in protections for yourself in the contract itself, checks and balances. I'm going to make sure that you have this much documentation for me before we go through it. And there's lots of things you can try to do. But at the end of the day, as I said, if they are responsive and they are the lowest, then they would be getting the bid. So you do what you can to protect yourself. I had one instance, this is many years ago, where we got in the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. The contractor had never done work of this type on the scale. They worked in this area, but not on the scale. It was probably 10 times bigger than something they had ever done. And there was a member of this public entity, this public agency, that had recently been put on the board, who was very good friends with the owners of this company. So it was clear that was why they bid, because they felt that they would get have an in with somebody on the board. The bids came in, and there was a number of board members, while they were responsive and responsible, there was a number of board members that were concerned about whether this contractor could do the job. And so they held a vote, and they actually completely threw out the entire bid. They said, we need to start over. It was kind of signaling, we don't want you to win this project, but they also realized, and that's where we were hired. We were actually hired right after the bids came in, and they said, what can we do? We don't think that this company has the merit to do this, but they have checked all our boxes. What do we do? And so we looked at the rules, we looked at the statute, we told them, based on the RFP, the way it was written, I said, you guys can throw this entire bid out. It's going to stall everything, because now we got to start all over. It's going to put back your project by about 5 or 6 months. But you can throw it out. And then what we did is we redesigned the RFP to make it more, in fact, actually their results, what their proposals were, required more transparency. There were more boxes for them to check to be responsive bidder. And when they came in, interestingly enough, they were almost, they were still responsive, but they were just above the price of the second place winner in the first time. So they flipped. 2 became 1, 1 became 2. And the new number one had done this work for years, decades, all over the country actually. And so we awarded to them, and the previous number one, who is now number two, went to sue my client and said, you guys rigged the whole process. But when we came in, because this is kind of one of my specialties, is procurement, this whole competitive bidding. When we came in, the first thing I did is I looked at their bidding process, and it was a mess. And I said, the reason probably why these guys turned out to be responsive is because your bidding process isn't transparent enough. It doesn't have enough detailed information. There was too many areas where they could gain points that they might not necessarily if we were really transparent. So we rewrote their entire procurement model, and when the now number two complained and went to sue, I had a meeting with their attorneys. They came in with the owners, and I said, and I brought them in a conference room, and I laid out all of the process and all the books and all the reviews and all the scores, and I said, you're not allowed to take these because this is our material. But I said, I'll give you 3 hours, and you can look through everything on here, and if you can tell me anywhere in this process that you think that you were treated unfairly or that you should have won this bid, then go ahead and sue me. But you go ahead and look through this. And it was the most awkward situation because about 45 minutes in, the attorney got up, slammed his book, and walked out the door, leaving the two owners of the company sitting there. He didn't say anything. He was just furious, and he got up and walked out the door. And then I kind of like sitting there, and I looked at them, and I looked at the guy who just left. I couldn't believe he just left, and I said, you guys still have 2 hours left. Do you want to continue to look through it? And they chatted, and they left, and then we never heard from them. And so there are ways to get around it, but if the flip side had happened, if we had redone the process and that previous number one still was number one, they would have had to done the project. Probably not. What you want to think about, you're right. A lot of these contractors will have a project where they build it and then they enter into a management agreement to manage the project afterwards. In fact, there was one guy I represented for a number of years who was in assisted living housing, and so he was the developer. He hired a contractor, and that's where I got involved with him because the contractor did terrible work, so we had to sue his contractor. But once the building was finally completed, he took over because it was tax credit deal and everything else, and he and his management company managed it, and they would rent out the apartments to seniors or assisted living people and continue to manage it. I believe he's still managing because there's a 10-year period they have to do that. But that management agreement is going to be a separate contract than the construction agreement. So what you're going to have in that public project, probably what you're talking about here, if it was structured the way I had it, was the developer purchases the land. Maybe they purchased the land from the government for $1. Like this guy bought two city blocks of Chicago for $1 each because it was in a terrible neighborhood. Then developed it, but was using state and federal funds, and so he had to follow certain of these bidding requirements for the contractor who ultimately won the award to build it. So my client was the developer, the contractor built it, and then after the project was over, so if there was disputes between developer and contractor, that would be owner and contractor and everything that. But once the project was completed, my developer that I was working with had this separate management company, and interestingly enough, that management company entered into a deal with the developer. So he entered into a deal with himself. And that's kind of some of the unique stuff about public funding and public housing where you get into some of these troubles. But there are still checks and balances because you're using federal funds as to what requirements the manager has to do. But it's less about this part of the process that we're talking in today as far as competitive bid to win the construction aspect of it. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, that helps.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, well, last couple things in the slide. So they talk about short lists. So once you get, you send out the RFP, the request for proposals. Once the proposals come back in, you could have a short list. There could be a pre-qualification process, and this maybe some of goes back to your initial question, where maybe the way you don't get the first that contractor you don't like, Maybe you have a pre-qualification process and somehow they don't qualify. Again, if it's a public project, there have to be objective standards. But some of those standards may include their cost overruns on other projects or what have you. I had a project, one of the things that always goes out in public jobs is they have to submit whether they've had anybody, the contractor itself or anybody on their board that has been involved in any criminal activities, criminal charges or otherwise, and maybe fraud or stuff like that. This was a project probably going back, I'd say 8 or 10 years ago, and the most successful, or the bidder that was in the lead by price and by experience, included one of their board members was Isaiah Thomas, not the current basketball player, but the basketball player Isaiah Thomas that played back in the 80s with the Detroit Pistons. And then he went to go work for the New York Knicks, and he was a general manager for the New York Knicks. While he was with the New York Knicks, he got sued for sexual harassment, and there was a criminal investigation into him for potential sexual harassment. That had to be disclosed in their RFP because he was a member of the board. And so the client came to me and said, is this sufficient to disqualify them? Should we take them on as the contractor because they had the best bid and they were responsive? And I said, yes, because this is a pre-qualification. If you don't want to get involved with this organization, even though they may be the most responsive and responsible, if you don't want to get into it because there's other extracurriculars that are associated with that, they were required to provide criminal background history or other things that had to be disclosed. It wasn't proven. He had never, I don't think the charges had been finalized. I don't believe he was ever convicted. But it was enough that they could shortlist them, take them off the short list of pre-qualification. Another thing that can happen is if you're doing the best value method as opposed to the lowest responsible responsive, because once you open them in that part, by and large, the lowest one wins. But if you're in the best value method, you can say, okay, I got 6 bids in, but I like these 2 the best because of combination of price and experience. Those 2 have the best value, and then you can shortlist and have what sometimes we call a horse race. You can see if you can have them bid against each other, maybe best and final offer, kind of tighten up their bids to get the best price. Here's your process that you go through. You're going to have an invitation to bidder. That's your request for proposal. Then the people that are going to bid, they're going to submit their bids or proposals. You have the opening. If you're at the lowest responsible and responsive at this stage and the evaluation stage, then the award is going to be made. If you're in the best value, the evaluation process is a little more detailed and can be a little more extended out. Eventually, you'll give notification of the award, and then you'll sign a contract. And during these last 3 bullets, you may be negotiating terms of the contract. There may be some more details that are specified, especially during the best value method. If it's in the lowest responsive and responsible, sometimes right upon opening a bid and award, you get the contract signed right away because the argument is part of your bid was to accept the contract as drafted. So that's your process. And then the last thing is, I actually have a call this afternoon on this very slide. What happens if there's an error in the bid? So let's say I'm a contractor and I submit my bid and I say I'm going to build that factory for $10 million, and it turns out that you had a math error. Somebody did the wrong thing and it really should be $11 million. Somebody forgot to carry the 1 or whatever it might be. What do you do? Can you change it? Can you fix it? And how do you fix it? And what does that do to your bid? So, if there's a math error, you can withdraw them, but not modify it. So if you say you could do it for 10 and it should have been 11 or 12 because you had a math error or a clerical error, you can withdraw it because for fear that you will then be given the award and you're supposed to enter into the contract. Because when you submit your bid, you say, I promise in submitting my bid, I'm going to enter into this award. And so you get it back and it says $10 million. They come to you and says you're going to take the award. It's $10 million, and then you're forced to have to get into that contract. You don't want to deal with that. So you can withdraw it, but you can't modify it. You can't change it to 12. It can only be at 10, but you can say, I don't want to take the job. If it's a judgment error as opposed to a math error, those cannot be withdrawn. I thought that I could do it for 10, but I made a mistake in what I thought the cost was going to be. Gosh, I want to come back. I want to withdraw it. The answer is no. That's a judgment error. In fact, that's the issue right now that I have to deal with, and it's going to be a discussion. This company that we represent, and it's a private company, so the one caveat I will say on these rules, these are rules that are applicable that are enforced. They're applicable for everybody, but they are strictly enforced on public jobs. And it's to protect your money, because your jobs are being built by with your tax money. So that's why they have to have rules in that. If it's a private job, you want to use these rules to your benefit if you're the owner, but you don't have to follow them. So here's what happened in the project that I'm going to talk about later this afternoon. We all know what happened with freezing in Texas, and all those supplies, all the heating went down, everything froze, gas went up to $10 a gallon, all those things that were terrible what happened down there. And so the contractor, actually both contractors, submitted bids, but they were based on numbers that they had gotten before the Texas issue. But apparently, the cost of the remediation and correcting things and where certain materials are coming from is heavily impacted by the Texas ice storms and the availability of labor and manpower and materials. So their bid, I think it was like $8 million, $10 million. I have to go back and look. It's gone up by $800,000 because of costs that they had not anticipated based on what happened. Now, is it a judgment error? Is it a change in just the supply chain error? It's not really known, and that's the discussion we're going to have. Can this company withdraw their bid? Can they come back and change it? And that's what the conversation I have with the client. But if it's just simply, I missed it, I had a judgment error, contractor stuck with it. If they said it's $10 million and they made a judgment error, they got to bill it for $10 million, and they're done. And that's to protect your money. The exception to forcing them on this judgment error is what's called the stamp-up rule. So let's say that the bids are $10 million, $14 million, $16 million, or $10 million, $14, $15. There's at least a $4 million, maybe up to a $5 or $6 million disparity on a $10 million or $12 million project, whatever it is. That's 30-40%. If the owner should know that the bids are so grossly underbid, but snap it up because they wanted to get that best price, the contractor, even if they had a judgment error, can come back and say, you can't do that. I want to withdraw it because you're taking advantage of what you should have seen. You, the owner, you saw those 3 bids or 4 bids, whatever it was. We were so far off. There's no way that you should have, in your understanding of how this project put together, should have known that our bid was right. We made a mistake. We want to withdraw. So that's the stamp-up rule. And those, again, are the last ones to protect the contractor that's being taken advantage of. The first ones are really to protect you and your tax dollars. Just as a side, like I said, for private clients, because they aren't bound by any laws, they can make all their own rules for how the RFP process goes. If my client, in my discussion this afternoon, wants to allow the contractor to increase its bid, they can. I might recommend that they communicate to the other contractors that this is happening so everybody else kind of gets a second bite at the apple. But it's not mandatory. So there's more flexibility for private people on these rules. Any questions on that? Okay. Go then. All right. So different type of contracting methods. So these are, we talked about these. These are kind of little pie chart or little bubble diagrams. This is what we've talked about a million times. This is your triangle. Owner and top, two lines to the architect and contractor, and then what's under their respective umbrellas. Vendors, subcontractors are under the architect, the consultants. This is the most traditional model that you'll see over and over. That's why I use it for all the examples. And this is the triangle that most contracts are designed to work with. So they don't say triangle. They don't specifically state that, but you're going to have the B101 is the contract between the owner and the architect, and the A101 and the A201 is between the owner and contractor, and that's how the triangle works. So that's the first one. What are the advantages? Very common, as I said. Everybody's comfortable using it. And traditionally with this kind of triangle, this traditional model, is normally the drawings are finished before you go out to bid. You enter into your contract with the architect first, the architect designs the factory, and then you go out to bid and you finish the second leg of the triangle. And it keeps the parties independent. That's the advantages. And the biggest is everybody's done it for decades, for hundreds of years, not just decades, centuries. Disadvantages. Because it's kind of linear in its concept, and because the parties are separated, the contractor doesn't really have much input during the design phase. In fact, unless it's with the construction manager, they have no input. They come in after the fact. It's linear in the sense it's design first, then bid, then build, so it takes longer. There's no overlap between when the design is going on and when the construction. As we talked about, because the architect's on one side of the triangle with its own contract and the contractor's on the other side, they kind of look at each other as potential enemies. There's that adversarial relationship. Price competition can reduce profits. That's a disadvantage to the contractor. They're going to say, well, God, if I didn't get involved earlier, then I can't make as much money because I'm not a part of the team. I have to compete against everybody else. So you have some problems on the backside. And then in conjunction with that, the contractor, because their profits may be reduced, they're going to be what's called a claims contractor, meaning once they get signed on board, they have to bid. They have to have the best bid, so they underbid it. Projects are underbid all the time, and they think to themselves, I'm going to underbid it, but I'm going to make my money back by making claims throughout the course. Oh, your drawings weren't perfect here, architect, change order. Oh, the soil's not exactly what I want, change order. Oh, there's a weather thing, change order. And all these change orders give them more money. So they try to make their money back after they sign the contract. And that results in some problems with truth in bidding. So those are your kind of disadvantages. Interestingly enough, I know there's 6 bullets for disadvantages and 3 for advantages. I still say the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. That's why it's the traditional model, why everybody uses it. The simplicity and the frequency that it's used kind of make this more common. That's what the chat here is. Okay. Next. So the next is what's called developer as a prime model. So with the traditional, this is developer as a prime. And that's where here you have an owner and they hire a developer. Now sometimes these may be the same people, but they create a developer like a single purpose LLC. But the owner, or the owner may have property that they want to develop, so they hire a developer to do that. And it may be just like a real estate investment type thing. So, but then once you get to the developer level, then you're working in this owner as a developer model as the same triangle. So once you get the next level down, it's the same. Why this is used is you may have an owner that is in real estate. So there's a client at my old firm that we worked for, a guy named Sam Zell. Sam Zell is from Chicago. He owns more apartment units, or used to. I don't know if he still does. More apartment units in the country than any individual. But what he wants to do is when he is developing an apartment complex or owning it, wants to insulate himself or the company that he works for, it's Zell Development, Zell Realty, whatever it might be, from the potential liabilities of a lawsuit from an architect, a lawsuit from a contractor, a lawsuit from somebody who slips and falls on the project. So this owner, Sam Zell or whomever else it might be, creates a developer company. It's an LLC. If you remember the limited liability corporations from our lecture, that LLC has tax benefits. There can be managers and members. The owner here would be a manager or member. So you get tax benefits, you get revenue benefits, but you also get the benefits of liability. Kind of like the owner becomes a shareholder as a manager or member of the development company, but can't be sued. The contractor can only sue the developer, can't sue the ultimate owner. So this developer as a model concept creates often this legal fiction of an entity called the developer that then enters into the contract in the triangle here, and ultimately a payout comes back to the owner. So that happens lots and lots of projects. I have lots of clients that for every single project create a new developer LLC so they are protected up here. In fact, if you're in the real estate business, often the LLC, let's say that the building you're building is at 15 West Fullerton, it'll be called 15 West Fullerton LLC. I mean, they don't get any more creative than that. I have a project called 4 East Elm LLC. You can guess where that project is. So that's developer's model. Fast track model. So those, as we looked at, as I said, the previous models are this linear design. Owner-developer enters the contract with the architect. They design the project. They go out to bid. They hire the contract, and then they build. Design, bid, build. Fast track is how do we make the project get done faster? And time is money. So what do we do? And this is what started coming in 30, 40 years ago. You have your traditional model, design, that takes place. This is like a timeline. You design it. Then you have the bid and pricing. Then you award the contract and you build it. With the fast track is these things overlap. The design may take a little longer because you get the initial design done and then you bid it out, and that may be for the whole project or maybe for a portion of the project. And the contractor can start working on excavation and concrete formwork and other stuff while the designer is finishing the designs for the rest of the project, of which then the contractor can come in and do bid and pricing. And so by the time we get to the end of the bid pricing section, the construction's well underway, and then the parties finalize what the whole project is going to cost, and the construction gets finished. But if you look at these as timelines, the construction of the project is going to be finished much earlier than the traditional model. And that allows, like I said, if you're going to be doing a factory or something where one of those types of structure is an economic revenue generator, the earlier the doors are open, the faster you can start making money. So, if you guys remember from the lecture a couple weeks ago, the economics of construction, there was that 4 types of buildings. Some are buildings like you live in and don't have any revenue, and some are buildings that only are for revenue, like a factory. Well, the fast track method is something you might want to use for a factory, because the earlier you can start making your candy or your toys or what have you, the better it is for the owner, because they start making money. So as I say here, it's linear. Traditional is linear. Fast track overlaps. Speed of completed projects. The difficulty and the problems that come in with the fast track method is because construction is starting before the design is completed, the pricing and the estimates may be off. And that's why I have 2 bubbles here, is what you try to do, and that's another contract I'm working on right now, is you try to build in the contract a method where it says, I'm going to give you my first control estimate, and based on that price and everybody else giving your first estimate price, I win the award. and then as the designs go further on and complete, I will give you an updated price. And it may turn out that the pricing in this second bubble goes up, or you try to build in checks and balances so that it doesn't go up. So it's harder to control this, but if you think about that you're up and running so much quicker, even if it costs a little bit more than the traditional model, the end of money you save or you end up generating from making that piece of candy or that toy, whatever it might be coming out of that factory, is worth it. So some of the cost estimating controls are outweighed by the ability to get up and running more quickly. So design build is definitely fast track. But you can do fast track that is not design build. Like I have a project, the one that I'm working on the contract this afternoon. We're going to go out to bid. We have an engineer. We're going to go out to bid at 60% completion of drawings. So that's going to happen right about where we have here in this chart. We're going to get the bidding and pricing during that period of time. The contractors are already actually looking at the stuff even before the RFP goes out. And we're going to get pricing during this period of time. And then they are not actually going to start construction right away. They're going to do pre-con services where they're going to review the 60% drawings, and from 60% to 100%, the contractor and the designer are going to work on making the designs more efficient, but they're going to give us a second bid pricing here. So they'll start some preliminary work. They'll work with some preliminary construction work. They'll work with the architect to refine the design, and then they'll refine their bid, and then they'll do full boat construction after that. So that's even a more hybrid. It's fast track and combination, but never design build in the sense that the two entities are separate. Okay. Next model, multi-prime. Multi-prime is something I recommend you to stay away from if you can, but sometimes an owner wants to do that. If you can see, now this is only on the contractor side. This is what this chart, this bubbles is only on the contractor side. It is not design side. So what you're going to have is, if you think about the triangle, this is only the right side of the triangle on the screen. But what is missing is the word contractor. Because in this instance, the owner is going to enter into the contract with the electrician, with the plumber, with the mechanical, with the window supplier, with the door supplier, and some consultant that says this is how you should do it. And so there's not going to be one entity that is managing schedule other than the owner. There's not one entity that's going to be receiving all the invoices and compiling them for a bill other than the owner. So multi-prime is the owner is the general contractor. The owner is doing all the work that the general contractor would do. The reason why I don't recommend it is because most owners don't know how to do this. They're not general contractors. And all of the risk on cost overruns and everything else are on the owner. So you don't have that buffer to protect yourselves. Now, some owners can do this. Some owners are in that industry. They're contractors themselves. So they may, you're going to have like Walsh Construction. So Walsh Construction, big contractor nationwide, one of the largest in the country, but based out of here in Chicago. If Walsh Construction was going to build their new headquarters here in Chicago, they would multi-prime because they're a contractor anyway and they're an owner, so they would build their own. Some companies build the same thing so many times they may be able to do it themselves. Let's say, and I don't even know if they do multi-prime, but for example, McDonald's. How many different ways are there to build a McDonald's? They may have the set standard drawings. It's done over and over and over and over again, or Starbucks or these types of chains. They may decide to be a multi-prime because they're big enough to have their own internal construction group, and they're sophisticated enough that they can handle the prime contracts and handle it all themselves internally. But by and large, if the owner comes to you and says, "Oh, we built one of these factories 5 years ago, we can do this," and they've hired you to do the design, you designed it for them last time, and they had a contractor and they built it, and they said, "Hey, we can do it." my recommendation to you is to say to them, maybe you should think about that. Do you really want to do that? Do you want to take all those risks? But it is a model that's used. It's called multi-prime. Any questions on that? Okay. Construction manager contracting model. So this is a little bit different. There are two types of construction managers. This is a little bit different than contractor. So you can use construction manager as an agent in this is the builders, or this is the multi-prime model that you're looking at here. And here the owner says, I want to be into contracts directly with all these entities. I don't want a middleman. I don't want to pay the markup. I don't want to pay that. It's a small enough project, or I've done this enough. I'm going to do this multi-prime model. However, I recognize I'm not really a contractor by trade every day, so maybe what I do is I hire a construction manager to assist me. As you can see, the owner has direct lines with all of these trades. Every one of these trades has a contract with the owner. There should be actually a line between construction manager and owner, but there's no line between the construction manager as an agent with any of the vendors. And the reason why is because the construction manager and agent only works for the owner and has no contractual control over any of the trades or the vendors. The construction manager of an agent, its role is to watch schedule, watch price, and kind of be the eyes and ears on the project for the owner. So, if you're in that same conversation that I said about the multi-prime model, and your owner says, we did this before, we can do this, we really do it multi-prime, and they don't budge, what you say is, well then you need to hire a construction manager as an agent, someone to assist you in looking over your shoulder and making sure that everybody is keeping on schedule, keeping on budget, and that the work is being done properly. And that's what the agent's job is here. You can also use a construction manager as an agent in your traditional triangle method. In fact, as projects become larger and more sophisticated, I strongly recommend that as well. Sometimes they're called an owner's rep, sometimes they're a construction manager. So, for example, the Haribo Candy Factory up in Wisconsin, they have an owner's rep / construction manager as an agent. It's a traditional triangle. They have an architect on one side, they have the contractor on the other side, and sitting out next to the owner, because Haribo makes candy, they don't build factories, we have a construction manager and agent. And they are intimately involved with everything in the project to make sure it's going well. And the benefit that is the construction manager, the agent, not only is looking over the shoulder of the contractor, but they're also looking over the shoulder of the architect. So it's truly, going back to the agency lecture, it's truly an agent of the owner, truly speaking on behalf of the owner, and truly out there to protect the fiduciary issues that the owner has with respect to the project. Any questions on construction manager as the agent? Okay. The other is construction manager at risk. Now, as you look at this, this may be and does look a lot like the traditional triangle. Only what we have here is, instead of the word contractor on the right-hand side of the triangle, it's construction manager at risk. And what happens here is the construction manager at risk, if we went back to that fast track model, they get involved early before the drawings are complete. And they work hand in glove with the architect and the owner on pre-construction services to eliminate waste and to make sure that there are fewer questions, the RFIs, the other change orders, because the contractor, or in this case, the construction manager at risk, is involved earlier. So they have a better understanding of what the owner and architect want, instead of, I'm just bidding on a set of drawings I just saw. So It's much better for the owner in pricing and getting subcontracts lined up because they have this dialogue that starts happening early. But the same role of once the contract is signed and once the project is started, once you actually start construction, even though they're called a construction manager at risk, they're going to be acting like a general contractor. And that's why it looks like the triangle. They're going to enter into contracts with vendors and prime contractors and subcontractors and what else. So that's your CM at risk. Any questions on that? Okay. And this little chart, we can talk about advisory CM, I'll talk to you about it a little bit in a second, kind of shows where your risks are. So advisory CM is somebody that comes to you, that works with the owner, even before you've retained an architect. And an advisory CM and an agency CM are similar, but sometimes the advisory CM, or not sometimes, the advisory CM is not going to be managing the project site and managing the costs. They're going to come in the beginning and they're going to say, and it's sometimes what you do as an architect. They're going to say, okay, I'm looking at the project you want to develop. You want to build a new apartment complex. Where's the location? What's your time frame? What's your price point of the units, those types of things. So they're going to give information. I'm going to help you, introduce you to some architects. I'm going to introduce you to some contractors. I may even go so far as to help you put together your contracts. I'm going to give you some initial consulting services. That's an advisory CM. The agency CM, as I said, is the watchdog, looks over your shoulder, both contractor and architect, and they will be involved in the project on a daily basis. They'll manage schedule and fee and those types of things. And because they're watching the dollars and the schedule, their risks are higher. Agencies, advisory CM, very little risk. There's not much they can screw up that they can get sued for. If the agency CM screws up on pricing or makes bad advice on schedule, they could have some risk there. And then the at-risk CM, they're pretty much like a general contractor, so they're going to have the highest amount of risk. So construction managers, these are your different risk models. Design build actually have a couple of different models. The first, most basic traditional design build model is there's an owner and a design builder. One stop. You don't have two, you don't have a triangle, it's just linear. I enter into one contract for you to design and build my space from the very beginning to the very end. That's the standard traditional design build, been around for 50 years. It's an integrated company is one method. This is kind of the different relationships in the design build. So if you go back to the bottom side, this design builder, how is this organization created? So one is an integrated company, meaning it's one company, we both do design and construction. That's integrated. You could have a model where the contractor is the prime and the owner, the architect engineer is the subcontractor. So these would be two entities that they've joined together, maybe in a joint venture, maybe in an LLC, but the leader of it, the one that's going to probably take the most risk in it, is the contractor. So that's a contractor-led design build. Or you could have the design-led design build. This is more rare, but becoming more common, I guess. No, not more common, being used more, but I would say for design build, if you wanted to take a percentage, the integrated company is probably 20%, contractor prime is maybe 50 to 60%, and the architect as prime is probably the remainder. Then these other ones down here where the A is prime but multiple trades, this would be, in this instance, this is kind of like the A acting as a multi-prime here. AE is the first in contract, they're the top of the chart, and they have a bunch of independent trades. They don't have a general contractor. And then the design build prime, and I have a couple of these slides coming up of what they look like, where there's one entity and then there's multiple integrated companies below. And then finally there's joint venture. And this has to do with some liability issues that we talked about. So what do these look like in a chart? So this is the multi-integrated company. You have a design builder, and the design builder has two separate companies. These companies may come together and create the LLC for a single project. Or this could be a single company that keeps two subsidiaries on a regular basis. So it could be a one-time project, or it could be projects over and over. So this is your multi-integrated design-build model. Any questions on that one? A different one is the owner has a joint venture design affiliated or joint venture construction affiliated. Now, it doesn't necessarily look like design build, but the joint venture here that the owner enters into the contract, the joint venture itself is the single entity, but on the contract, both the designer and the contractor are identified as members of the joint venture. And the purpose of that is because the joint venture is a loose agreement. It's not like a legal agreement necessarily like an LLC. Joint venture, the owner wants to have the design-build characteristics of the joint venture working together. But if one party becomes financially unstable, each one of these joint venture entities, because they are both in agreement with the contractor, are 100% responsible for the errors or problems of the other one. So that's the biggest kind of takeaway of this joint venture multi-integrated company is that each affiliate of this design-build entity are 100% responsible for the other affiliate, and the owner can elect, if there's a problem, to go after one or both, or one or the other, or both. Make sense? Okay. So a few more slides on design build, and then we're almost finished. Why do we do design build? Well, one of the earlier questions was this fast track model. Is that design build? And the answer is design build is always going to be fast track because it's speed of project delivery. There is overlapping. The other advantage to the owner is you don't have to worry about who you're suing. You're going against one entity, one individual, or one company. So that's single point responsibility. The cost certainty actually can be better with design build because if you think back to that slide where we had the fast tracking, even if the contractor is working with the architect, kind of like that project that we have that we're going out at 60% drawing completion, there still are going to be elements that the contractor may, because it's a different company, they perceive, I would build it this way versus what the architect ultimately will design the remaining 40% that way. But if you're in design build, because everybody's together, you get better cost certainty because that company is working together. When they put down something on a drawing, even if it's 60%, they kind of both know together, the contractor and the architect for that company, how the end result's going to be. So it's that cost certainty and communication. And I think, from my experience over all the years I've worked in it, I've had very few claims, litigation-wise, or disputes against a design-build company in comparison to whether I've had to sue an architect or a contractor. So there's this minimization of having to call Hanahan later on in the road because there's less disputes. And that's because everybody's talking all along. The better control of information and so forth. And then there's not this split between the architect, engineer, and the contractor. They're all on one team together. Those are your advantages of design build. What are your disadvantages? Well, we've talked about a lot that sometimes you have an owner that really doesn't understand construction, and their backstop for the owner is the architect is the watchdog, the independent decision maker, the entity that kind of wears the white hat sometimes between a dispute of the owner and the contractor. And so when you have a design build, while there is this collaborative effort going on, you don't have that watchdog, and the owner, depending on the circumstances, can be taken advantage of because there's that independent decision maker's gone. So that's a disadvantage of design build. Pricing can be suspect for the same reason. If you're doing fast track, but you have a separate designer from the contractor, you would still ask your designer to make cost estimates. And those cost estimates can be a backstop to when the fast track pricing comes in from the contractor. And so when they come in at 60%, and we're actually doing that with this project that I've been talking about, that I'm working on this agreement, our engineer is doing cost and quantity takeoffs. And when we go out to bid in 2 weeks with the 60% drawings, we have a pretty good ballpark from our engineer of what this project should cost. And so we're getting fast track pricing, and we know that the contractors kind of have to take a little bit of a swing at the fences here, a little bit of a guess, because they're not 100% drawings. They're only 60%. But we at least have this ballpark backstop by the architect, so we can eliminate some of the problems that come in with fast track pricing. So it's not just losing the independent decision maker throughout the course of the project. It's even in the very beginning when your pricing your bid comes in. The economic risk issue here is if you have a design build entity that just was created for your project only, well, there's a risk there because they've never worked with each other. Is this going to be a good marriage for them that could cost you? Or what happens when things do go south? Maybe you have your own construction manager as an agent that's helping you. What happens when you find out that something's gone wrong because this design build agent entity is not really what they said they were? How do you, even if you have a backstop with somebody else, how do you control that? A little bit differently if you have it split on the more traditional method. Now, the interesting thing, if you remember when we were talking way back when on the earlier slide where it was that traditional model triangle, and I said there was only 3 advantages and there were 6 disadvantages, but I felt that traditional model outweighed it, even though it was 3 versus 6. In this one, I think the opposite here is. If you look, there's a lot more advantages to design build than disadvantages. And I think this is a more accurate representation. I think design build is a good model to use. You have to do your shopping to make sure you have the right design build entity, but you want to do that for any big project anyway, whether it's traditional or design build. But I think the cost benefits, the collaborative effort, the minimization of disputes and litigation, I think these elements here are very definite advantages. And that's why, as I said, why I see fewer pieces of litigation with design build entities than I do with the regular traditional model, because there's this communication that goes on between the parties. Any questions on advantages, disadvantages? Okay. So a little bit, the last thing as far as differences between design build and traditional. So in the design, kind of the concepts that are rolled into it. The design build, it's called I have this called system by system design with looping feedback. Looping meaning there's the interaction between the designer and the contractor. They loop information back. And what happens is the system by system design. I design the foundation system. I design the steel support system. I design the electrical system. Those can be designed, like I said, semi-independently here. You can say, I've got a team that's only working on electrical. Now, it's ultimately got to be integrated with the plumbing, and there's a coordination issue and everything else. But being able to do the projects in chunks makes the project be done faster. Sometimes they call them packages. We're going to release the excavation package. We're going to release the steel package. So that allows the project to go faster. That allows the contractor to get out for pricing and bring subcontractors in more quickly because they're working on system bids as opposed to the whole comprehensive project bid. So that's one difference. Whereas if you're doing traditional, you got to design the whole thing, and then the contractor looks at it as a complete whole, which is good, but bids it. It may be bid differently. It may be, and that may cause more cost or more time. This concept of defensive detailing. Sometimes an architect will over-design because they're worried that they're going to have more RFIs, or that the contractor's going to say the drawings are terrible. So, then the architect, the owner looks at the architect and says, "Well, what do you mean? Why are your drawings so bad? Why is this costing me more money?" So an architect may over-design defensive detailing to get more information on the drawings to protect itself. If it's design-build, well, designers talking to contractor. They're the same company, so they don't have to do this defensive detailing. So even the work that the designer does on paper is less than the design-build than you're going to see in the traditional. Now that can be problems later on if something goes wrong with the building and they don't have all the detailing in the drawings. Well, then you're like, okay, is this a designer, is it a contracting error? Should they have had more detail? Probably, but partially the owner doesn't care. They're like, well, whether you built it wrong or you designed it wrong, it's wrong. So you have to pay for it to be fixed. So pluses and minuses of whether you have as much detail on the drawings, but I think ultimately it's better. The other thing here is because the contractor and the architect are working hand in glove in this design-build entity, contractor can be more free about it. Say, that truss system you have is fine. We have to have this big span to cover so we can't have columns in the middle of this big huge room. And I see that you have this truss system, but maybe you could think about it differently this way. Let's try this alternate design, sometimes called value engineering. And that could, again, reduce cost, create speed, so there's more incentive to do that. And then the last thing on here for this page is MEP, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and then FP is fire protection. Those are kind of like in this defensive detailing. They don't have to be schematic. They don't have to be in great detail at all, because the contractor knows ultimately what they're going to be doing in this. So these are some differences. Whereas in a traditional project, you may not have just schematic for the MEP and F fire protection. Separate from, it would be, again, more information that you would want to put on the drawings for an architect. Last couple things, and then we're done. Also differences. There's greater than usual pricing constraints and price input. So in a traditional model, you're going to have more constraints and how the prices is put in, because you have to see everything in detail, whereas in design build, you're going to have more flexibility on the system by system. There's going to be out-of-sequence provision details to meet the contractor's need to price the project. Sometimes for this one, because in the traditional design, the out-of-sequence, you're going to have things all at once, versus the design build, sequence or system by system. Maybe there's some issues there where the design builder, the contractor needs to get a little bit more information. So this could be a disadvantage of it. And then this last thing, heavy usual reliance on performance specifications. I wouldn't worry about that too much. That's kind of this concept that your mechanical, electrical, plumbing, fire protection is schematic. A performance spec is just say it only needs to perform to a certain level. So those are some differences between design build